Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I want to talk about different attachment styles in kids. And this is going to probably be a bit of a long video, so I'm going to try to make this as succinct as possible, but there's a lot to offer in this topic. And this is actually based on a really great question I got from a student inside of the Personal Development School. So the question was essentially, have you ever seen people change their mind about kids after doing the inner work? And the answer to this is yes. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody is supposed to want to have kids. And this definitely doesn't mean that everybody who does inner work is suddenly going to change their mind. But it is something that I have seen, I don't want to say very commonly, but I would say like a significant number of times. Now, it's hard to say that, that can't be based on other factors. Like maybe they start doing inner work and then they develop different areas of their lives. And then, maybe from the women's perspective, they are getting closer to an age where they can have kids and they start to consider it differently, or maybe different biological factors are at play in men and women. So I can't say conclusively that what I'm about to share with you in this video is specifically based on somebody changing just because of the inner work. But what I will say is that I'm going to, in this video, give you an exercise to help you get clear and to extend this to somebody who might be on the sort of tipping point or wondering or questioning, an exercise to help also that person potentially get clear on whether or not wanting kids versus not wanting kids is based on fear or truth. Okay, and so I'm going to go through different attachment style patterns that I recognize in this video that tend to show up around children, and what some of the subconscious associations are and fears and the different patterns in the subconscious. And I'm also going to address the basically an exercise to like break through those points, and also another 3 really key features that I see that tend to lead people to not want kids and to sort of fear kids, and basically based on trauma. So these can be things that we don't even recognize and are very far from our conscious mind. So before I dive into the video, I wanted to share a few personal things. Number one, sorry, not personal things. Number one, I do believe in pure personal choice. Like there is a subconscious component that says like this just is not in a person's subconscious preferences and nature. I guess we would say technically nurture. And I also believe in the ability for people to not want kids out of trauma, out of fear. And in that case, you want to clean up the trauma so you can get a really clear picture on what's going on. And you want to be able to isolate that trauma and know what that trauma is based upon, so that there's not this like questioning. And it's not uncommon for me as well to see women who want to have kids suddenly in their 40s, or and of course women can have kids in their 40s, but obviously it's a little bit different, right? It starts becoming a different relationship to your body and all these different things. And sometimes that doesn't really set in until that point for different women who have trauma in their early childhood and upbringing. So I'm going to go through like what these key points are and how to sort of filter out what's just a deep program of fear or resistance versus what's truth. Okay, so I want to begin by sharing reasons I see people not wanting kids and correlate this with different attachment styles. So as a general pattern, I see avoidant attachment styles and not wanting kids the most. Generally, I would say I actually see fearful avoidance not wanting kids most, then dismissive avoidance, but it can be a toss-up. Like as a pattern, I'd have to sit and actually calculate the exact numbers, but generally as a pattern from what I've seen in relationships to hundreds of clients over the years, it's probably fearful avoidance slightly more than dismissive avoidance. However, fearful avoidance more often end up having kids because they end up focusing more on other people's feelings and expectations from them, whereas dismissive avoidance don't. And so usually the resistance comes most from fearful avoidance through communication, but usually dismissive avoidance end up not wanting kids the least and following through with it. And then I would say anxiously attached individuals and secure attachments are actually roughly the same. in my experience of seeing these relationships through. So I'm going to share why, and then what to do about the trauma and what the natural preferences really consist of. Okay, so the natural preference part has to do with personality needs. So we all have a specific set of subconscious personality needs, and these are essentially the drivers of your life and your decisions. And we have an amazing course on this inside the school that really highlights the importance of personality needs and their order and hierarchy and where they come from. But they impact all sorts of different things. They impact your decisions, they impact your productivity in life, your life purpose, your self-sabotage or not, like how you choose to self-sabotage or if you choose not to at all, sort of thing. So there's a tremendous impact of your personality needs, and these are all at the subconscious level. Now, let's take just to be clear here too, let's take the context of I can't afford to have kids or I can't have kids for physical or other reasons out of this equation. Okay, we're just purely talking about the mind level in this video. Now, if one of your dominant personality needs, let's say, is freedom or adventure, right, your subconscious might associate kids as taking time away from your most important need. And our personality needs are essentially what we identify as our sense of self or ego mind. So if we perceive this threat directly to like the most important personality need or subconscious driver that we have, then obviously at a subconscious level, we are going to want to move away from that and towards what we have defined at a deeper level truly matters to us, like freedom. So you can sort of plug in a need here and see what shows up for you or your loved one, right? Like you might be in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant who doesn't want kids, and you might go, oh my gosh, they want their freedom, their autonomy, their independence, and their security, and kids could potentially provide a threat to all of those things. So of course they have a natural preference towards not wanting children, right? Now here's where the more traumatic points come up. Okay, so there can be a natural preference, and you can plug in your needs there and sort of see like what do you think the biggest needs are in your life based on how you live your life and how you show up and your day-to-day behavior essentially. And then you can sort of move this backwards and we can look at like the non-preference parts. Okay, so here are the common things I see for fearful avoidance. Often fearful avoidance were caretakers as children. Okay, they can have parents who emotionally involve them in their problems. They can have parents who were addicted, who had mental health issues, and so they took on all of those emotions because children are highly, extremely attuned to their caregivers when they're young. They're basically absorbing all of their emotional state and being imprinted by it. And so there's a high chance that your subconscious mind has this void of feeling taken care of or responsible to yourself or having basically gotten specific rites of passage in childhood. And when this happens, usually the subconscious basically has these stored associations of taking care of others in a home environment, like not having your own space, having somebody to take care of full time. And usually the subconscious is seeking to equilibrate from the lack of that, of having their needs met, to just be free and be a child, be a kid in childhood. And so sometimes the subconscious will hold on really tight to the freedom, to the being able to just sort of not have responsibility to others, fearing it, having all these fear-based associations to it. This isn't like, oh, I just like freedom and these are my choices. It's like, what if I feel like I felt again in childhood? And you'll notice that there's this like intense association for people who fear losing that or fear basically reliving the imprints they received in childhood. And so in this case, that's an example of the subconscious mind just having negatively stored associations because of traumatic imprints in childhood and the fear of like invasion to their personal boundaries. Okay, so obviously in this case, it's not uncommon to want kids. However, this can operate in a polarity if there are positive associations to this. So what that means is if you were the fearful avoidant and then you loved taking care because you felt like you saved a parent's life or multiple parents' lives, or you got so much love and connection when you did that, or that turned around for you and was great, then you might actually really be driven to have kids. So it can operate in polarities based on the subconscious associations you made to the experience of being a caretaker in early childhood, okay? Usually there are certain violations of boundaries, but that's not always the case. Now, another example, and this is what we'll see with dismissive avoidance sometimes. If your emotional needs were deeply unmet in your early life, okay? So let's say you have two uninvolved parenting styles. And so what can happen, right, is the adult can feel, so when that child grows into, excuse me, sorry, when that child grows into their adult version of their lives, right? They might feel like their emotional tank is already operating on empty. So they might have this subconscious association that says, like, I'm not really interested in being a caretaker because I don't have a whole lot of emotional energy to give because I didn't feel like there was this fulfillment in childhood. So their subconscious hangs on to this perception of lack, and then we'll feel afraid to have to give emotional energy and time to a child. And so that's a really common dismissive avoidant reason I see. This can also be just that you had two authoritarian parents. Like, you felt like you had no control over your life as a child and can fear losing control again over your own life and over your own boundaries and needs if you go into your adult life and have children. Like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to have control over how much I get to sleep or over what their needs are, or if they have temper tantrums, I'm going to have somebody attached to me. It's going to feel like I'm losing control over my own life again. So again, you'll see that those are the subconscious associations from childhood that your mind is naturally reprojecting onto the potential of having children. Okay, so what you'll see is, like, this is most common in dismissive avoidant and fearful avoidant attachment patterns. Now, I want to go through a couple other really important points here. If you've built really negative associations to kids as a whole, so maybe you just have these stories that you've developed because of what other people have told you. Maybe you had parents who made you feel like you were a burden, and then you subconsciously were programmed to believe through repetition, right? You keep hearing about how kids are a burden, it's so hard, you lose all your sleep. You keep hearing these horror stories over time. Well, that's one of the ways we get programmed. It's anything we hear repetitively, one of three major ways. So if you keep getting this input, eventually that's going to become like your output. You're going to feel like, okay, well, kids are a horrible burden and it's really difficult and it's going to, be challenging and traumatizing. So if my subconscious associations are that, if those are my programs, then obviously I don't want to, the brain's wired to avoid pain. So obviously I don't want to go in that direction, right? So look at what your stories are about children, what your beliefs are about having kids as well. Okay, what do I believe? And write all those things out and then question them. You really want to question them. Can I absolutely know that these are true? Because you might have had these associations, for example, from your mom who was a single parent and could hardly pay the bills, and she might have had a different struggle than you. Maybe you're a young man or a young woman and you are thinking that same thing, but this time maybe you're married and you have a secure relationship and a healthy partner, and so you're going to have two people taking care, and maybe you have a better job than your mom did. And so we want to question the programs we got because we may not be living in the same circumstances as the people who gave them to us, okay? So you want to question these things. And the idea here, I'm going to give you one other really important thing to question. I'll go through it with you in like order here to do an exercise, but you really want to question all these things because you'll be able to weed through. And if you realize, oh my gosh, so many of these subconscious associations are just based on programming and they're not even what I truly believe at a conscious level, then you'll see that your aversion to having kids or resistance is actually based more on programmed fear than on your conscious mind's truth. And so when you can sort of separate and filter out the difference, now you're left with a decision that's authentic to you. So you want to do this work ahead of time so you can see, and you might find in the end that, you know what, I've done all this work and I see what the difference is, and I still prefer not to have kids. I'm still not that interested. And that's okay too. But you want to do the work to really see, okay? So the last really big piece that I see, and I think this is a really important piece, and we have a whole course inside the school about this, about reparenting. But if you had a trauma or traumas in your early life that made you reject your inner child as a result of the trauma, so let's say you've disconnected from yourself very strongly at a young age because you believe connection to certain parts of yourself were unsafe, then your rejection to your own inner child is likely to translate in your beliefs about your ability to relate and connect to and want to relate and connect to young children. So I'll give you an example. I was speaking to a fearful avoidant female once, and she had a really hard childhood where both parents were addicts and there was a lot of trauma in the household. And she said she grew up, and this didn't really set in until after the death of a family member, until she was in like second or third grade. And she said as a young girl, she was really like sweet and feminine and, really like loved playing with dolls and thought about marriage and thought about kids and would act these things out with her dolls. And she said, and then when there was all this trauma, she realized she couldn't really afford to be sweet and feminine and passive and soft. She said I had to hyper focus on being empowered and strong and tough and figure things out and find solutions to problems. And I really went into like the masculine part of my personality. Like I really went into like problem solving, fixing, standing up, fending off, like, you know, finding problems, picking up the pieces. Like I really went into that part of my personality, she said. And so she built in these subconscious associations that said, you know, that little girl self and that need to be nurtured and cared for and, you know, tended to, and to build a life and to think about things beyond surviving. She felt that that was associated with weakness and disempowerment and helplessness and a threat to her survival. So she learned to reject that part of herself. And then, you know, in her 30s, she was fearing, essentially, connecting to a lot of that energy and those hopes and, you know, that feminine side of her and that longing to have kids and just nurture and be able to rely on others and trust, and all these things were associated with her not being able to survive. So she repressed all of the needs that came with that, essentially, right? So you want to check, is there a part of me in my life where I've cut off connection to my inner child because I associated the qualities of that inner child with things that were a threat to survival? And the more we cut off our own inner children, the more disconnected we will feel in our ability to relate to kids or need or desires to be around kids. That in combination with the stories that we have in our own subconscious mind, okay? So again, there can still just be preferences. And I just want to reiterate that you're allowed to just have preferences based on personality needs, based on desires, right? But for the sake of this question, I'm going to help you sort of focus on what you can do to find out. So here's your exercise. Step 1, write down what you think your top personality needs are, okay? Needs of your personality in general. Again, I have a full course on this inside the school if you want to check it out, and see if there's a perceived conflict here, okay? See if there's this conflict between what you need and what you want and desire and your beliefs about how a child impacts those things. And question maybe those beliefs, right? Like, do you have a high need for freedom and you have this belief that, oh my gosh, kids take all of my freedom? Can you really know that? And you don't have to do the work on this either. Like, you can just choose to respect your needs and respect whatever associations you have to your needs being met or unmet and have preferences and choices. That's completely okay. But if you're wanting to really do a deep dive, look into that. Okay. Next, write down everything you believe. Step 2, write down everything you believe about kids being a negative impact to your life. So these are all your stories, all your subconsciously programmed associations, things you heard from mom and dad, the things you saw. So maybe you'll say, maybe it's like, oh, I won't be able to have any boundaries. And maybe that's a story. And maybe your subconscious associations are, you know, with your boundaries being violated are really painful. And so you're like, I don't even want to ever feel like that again. And that might be part of what is coming up. And these are solvable problems when you isolate them and identify them. You can go, okay, well, what are my boundaries? How would I set these boundaries? How would I ask for help and support? Who would I read? You know, you can structure things in a way so that you don't have to feel boundaryless, right? So question your stories and look for like how you can meet those needs in a more effective form. And then these are the last 2 big steps I would go through. So step 4, so 3 was question your stories. 4, scan through your own childhood from the age of, you know, as young as you can remember, to 12 years old. And even what you know about yourself in times that you don't remember, any stories you might have heard, right? So ask yourself, were there aspects of yourself that you rejected and pushed into your subconscious? Are there parts of your inner child that you've deeply rejected? Another example that I had from a dismissive avoidant once was a man, and he said, I repressed my emotions so much in childhood. I was terrified to feel like I had to give emotional energy to everyone again. I felt like my partner was already too much. And so the idea of like having to feel so much and having kids come in and all these things that could stir inside of me that I felt like I needed to repress to feel safe and to feel not vulnerable, because vulnerability was so scary to me, I pushed down. And that's why I didn't want to have kids. And so that was his original perspective, right? So again, like a dismissive avoidant response. So a lot of these things usually come from like fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance. And sometimes you'll have secure people who just have a preference away from kids. But I would actually say that that's probably quite rare. And last step, okay, and this is the most important step. Imagine that you didn't have any of these subconscious associations and you didn't have these rejected parts. So remember, I didn't say you didn't have the needs, because your needs you're entitled to, right? But question the subconscious programs you have, your beliefs about kids, and the rejected parts of yourself, the traits that you pushed away, your emotional expressiveness, or your ability to receive or rely and depend on others, these things. Question them and then ask yourself, if I didn't have these things, would I want to have kids then? And this is how you're going to be able to distinguish the difference between fear versus truth, okay? And so you need to do the work. Now, here's the last thing I want to say. You need to do the work on these things in order to be fully prepared. So you want to also, like, let's say you don't trust yourself to have boundaries. It doesn't mean have kids when you don't know how to have boundaries and what they are, okay? It means do the work on your ability to set boundaries so you can be prepared to have a healthy lifestyle with kids. And if you're getting stuck on things, if you're like, wow, I've moved through these subconscious associations, I can see the difference between the subconscious associations or belief patterns I have and my rejected parts, my inner child that I've rejected. And I can see, oh my gosh, if I didn't have these things, I would actually really want to have kids. It doesn't mean just have a child tomorrow, right? Or try to get pregnant tomorrow. It means do the work on those things so that you can go into this relationship with a child and you can have yourself too, okay? And so I'll put a whole bunch of information, if you guys are interested, put it in the description below about how to do this. But I hope that's really helpful, and it was a wonderful question. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for watching.